Oh my gosh, that mask is just so gross. Hey, you. Yeah, you. Have you seen your mask lately? Don't you think that's disgusting? And are those holes? My goodness, lady. Why don't you try and clean it and sew it? What, you're telling me you don't know how to sew? Well, I have a lesson to teach you, so today, let's learn how to sew by hand. For materials, you're going to need some thread or embroidery floss depending on what you're sewing. You're going to need your pins and needles, and then you're also going to need your fabric and or felt depending on what you're sewing. When sewing, you need to have a knot at the end of your thread. So for embroidery floss, you can just make a regular knot and then cut off the little excess later. For thread, I was taught in 5th grade to take your index finger and your thumb, then lick them. Grab the end of your thread, wrap it around your finger a few times, and then just rub your fingers together. Then gently pull and there should be a knot at the end of it. Now this is an easy step. You're just going to slide the thread or floss through the eye of the needle. Make sure there's a little bit of an extra amount on the one side as your thread may fall out of the needle, as seen here. So for our materials, we have a needle, some floss, and then some felt. Our first stitch is the running stitch. Basically, the running stitch is putting the needle back and forth through the material in a straight line. Make sure that the thread is evenly spaced throughout the material, and you may need to draw a small line if you're a beginner so you know how straight the line should be. Now I already made one stitch, but I made a couple more just to show you what a line would look like. To finish that stitch, we need to make another knot. I was taught that you should put your needle halfway through the material so it doesn't break through to the other side. Wrap the thread or floss around the needle 2 to 3 times, then pull the needle through. Then you should have a tight knot so your stitching should not fall apart. The next stitch is the backhand stitch. This is where you start off with the running stitch and you make one stitch. But on the back side, you make 2 invisible stitches and then bring the thread through. After you brought it through, put the needle at the end of the stitch that is shown. Pull the needle through, then it should look like you have a line going. I did this a few more times to show what a couple more stitches would look like with it. The last stitch is a blanket or stocking stitch. You have 2 pieces of material and you put them together. You then put the knot at the end of your thread on the inside corner of one of the pieces. You then put the material back together, then put the needle through both pieces of material. Don't close the stitch all the way, so make sure there is a little loop. With that loop, put your needle through it, then pull. That is how you make one stitch of the blanket stitch. This is normally shown for decorations like how you see on the side of stockings, but it can be used for making tight stitches when you're making something like a plushie. Next, I'm going to show you how to sew on a 2-hole button. So you're going to have your button and your thread and whatever material you're sewing it on. It's pretty simple. It's like the running stitch through both holes, and you need to do that many times to make sure that your button doesn't fall off or the stitch doesn't break. Since I've been using regular thread with this button, it's pretty much the same when you're making a knot. You just put the thread through halfway the material, you wrap it around the needle a few times, and then you pull it tight, and then you should have a good knot. The final example I'm going to give is with a 4-hole button. This one is kind of like the 2-hole button, but instead of just going back and forth, you can do that because that is an option, but you also can do crisscross where you make it look like an X, and then you could do the running stitch to the holes, or you can even go in a square motion where you put the thread through all 4 holes and make it look like a square. You can also do a combination of all 3 of these, and then you know your button is securely on the material. Now that you've learned how to sew, let's try and fix that mask. I see that you're using the running stitch to fix the holes. That is pretty good, since I know later that you're gonna go back and fix it better. So I've seen you clean and sewed up their mask. Now that's a pretty good job. It could be better. So why don't we just wear a double mask? It makes it look a lot better, plus it's safer. Now I think sewing is a technique that everyone should learn, whether it's by hand or on a machine. It can be useful for when you rip the hem on your shirt or the button on your pants pop off. Or if you're super creative like me, you can make little dolls, make patches to stick onto your things, or just make fun little decorations to hang around the house.